Hello, everyone. I'm Sam Eckmann of Gold Derby here with Mark Ricker, production designer for Feud, Capote versus the Swans. And you had the opportunity with this to recreate some really iconic New York locations of this period. I think maybe the most visited one is probably the restaurant La Côte Basque, where the Swans gather for their lunches. But that closed in 2004, I think. So did you find any kind of surprising details in your research as you recreated that space? What was that journey?
Well, one of the main surprises was that it actually moved. So when I was trying to research the original restaurant, which is now where I believe the Polo Bar is across the street from St. Regis, it sent me to another address. So I was standing in front of one place and thinking, well, this doesn't match any of the historic photos that I remembered. So I had to dig a little deeper and realize that the restaurant had moved at some points. But what we were recreating was the original restaurant because that's when the period, when everything in these events took place. But we were not able to shoot there because it doesn't exist anymore. And there wasn't a wealth of information on it. I would find a little bit of imagery here. One of the best images I found of the restaurant was from a menu cover where there was a photograph of it. And then luckily I came across the fact that Light Sleeper, this old movie with Susan Sarandon and Willem Dafoe, had actually shot there. So I just was able to, I pulled screen grabs of everything that I got off of that. And then really we just departed from it. We sort of anchored onto like the main key elements, this sort of, provincial sort of Disney-esque little French restaurant as if you were on the coast of Basque and with the brilliant murals, we did our own version of these beautiful hand-painted murals, which we designed our own versions and then had great scenics in New York recreate those. But it was a bit of a journey trying to figure out that and to find an exterior where we could shoot and to cobble it all together and build that set. It was one of the three key sets that we built on the show. We just kept going back there. Originally, the scripts had us in many locations, many restaurants, and ultimately we just had them the ladies' lunch in La Côte Basque. We kept going back.
Good to have a place to come back
Yeah,
to.
yeah.
Um, what happens when you're tasked with recreating something, but maybe something about like the color or the fabric that was the actual one doesn't register on camera the way you want it to? It's something isn't working. Where do you find license to stray a little bit and put your own elements in there?
Well, I think it depends on the location, the iconic nature of it. With certain places, you just want to try to nail it because that's what people who know this world are going to expect. But you always can deviate. You always just try to make it a richer version of, if it makes sense to do so. And Le Coq Basque was a prime example because it was, at least in the photographs that I had, it just the banquettes were a little bit more wine burgundy than we had, and the walls were a little whiter. There was just a little bit too much contrast, and we just wanted it to feel like cognac. We just wanted to just soak in that place. So we altered we just found a palette. We made all those chairs and upholstered them, and it was just everything was just a rich sort of caramel and you just wanted to feel like you just soaked into that place. So we adjusted the wall color and the tones and the banquettes, the leather and the sort of velvet chairs that we had made and just leaned into slightly different tones. And you just try to make it, better if you can than what was there for camera and for everything else that's happening in the show.
Yeah, I think the other spaces that really stand out to me are everyone's apartments because they're so useful for giving a glimpse into these characters. The Paleys, for instance, are extremely wealthy, and they have what is the process of finding all of that kind of vintage furniture and this super expensive furniture for their place?
Well, it's as was every, we didn't have as much money as the Paleys. So it's always a case of sort of high low. You find I had Cherish Hale, who is my brilliant set decorator on the show, and she sort of ran an army of decorators. We had so many sets to do, and arguably, I don't think a single one of them, save maybe there was a mansion when Babe's funeral took place. There were some furniture and drapery in there, there was a base that we leaned into in that place. Every place else was sort of soup to nuts, drapes, upholstery, furniture, everything. And so she did a brilliant job at finding, going onto sites and finding the essence of furniture, and then you just pepper it in with, I mean, all the drapes were made, and we find authentic pieces to flesh it out, but it's just a hodgepodge of proportion and upholstery, and very little of it was what it was worth in the real world of the Paleys.
Mm. And you and Cherish have worked together before, I believe. What is that? Does that benefit you to have a past
Oh,
collaborator there?
well, A, you become great friends. B, there's just a trust level. I mean, we know there's an ease in terms of finishing each other's sentences. I mean, the two prior jobs that we had done before this couldn't have been more different. And that one was Escape at Dannemora, which was a prison escape movie, and the other was Halston, which was sort of the welcome mat to come into this show. We'd been to this world before in terms of a similar period, in terms of creating iconic interiors that people would know. And there was definitely a crossover. I mean, the worlds of Halston and Capote, and we didn't see many of the same environments, except for perhaps Studio 54, which we did a bigger version on Halston and a truncated version on this. But there was definitely a crossover. And well, I mean, a perfect example is that on Halston, we printed a bunch of fabric in this iconic sort of sense of the canopy, the draped room that then we recreated. They were both lived in their own worlds, but the practical notion of how we figured out how to do it, we just said, oh, well, that worked on Halston. We'll just do the exact same thing here, where that Billy Baldwin, the draped room in the Paley, the library, was a very specific fabric that many people wouldn't know, but we had my great graphic designer, Eddie, went in on a color photograph, and we did research where it described the colors, but he recreated that pattern, and we printed all the fabric. So it's as much as we could eye it, an exact replica of what that fabric was. So having a common experience with that, it just leans into aiding the process in every way.
Hmm. Well, another location that feels like a big character building space to me is Capote's apartment, because I think the state of his apartment kind of, in a way, telegraphs his own, mental state. How do you construct a set that is like, how do you construct mess? Because he has a lot of mess. He's hoarded books and things like that. What is that process like?
Layered, and again, we start with research. I mean, I had lots of photographs of that apartment, lots of photographs of all of his places. Originally, we were gonna, the show was going to include his beach house out in the Hamptons, and we got it cut. But you get the essence of the man, and there was an eclecticism to him and a playfulness that was so much fun to recreate. We actually went into his real apartment in the UN Towers. Lovely woman lives there now, in order to photograph the exact view from his apartment that he had there of the East River and the UN building. And you just sort of, and then I started with his ground plan, because it just made sense. I could research which unit he had. I go online, it still exists. Obviously, the woman lives there. And again, we enhanced it a little bit. It was pretty much accurate. I added a couple of things just to make it more shooter friendly. We kept these floor to ceiling mirrors behind one wall that were not exactly camera friendly, but everybody got together. Jason McCormick, our DP, who just said, let's go for it. I mean, to me, it's what brings that set to life, because there's layers to that apartment, and then there's double layers, because you just look at certain shots, everything then just is replicated in the mirrors, and it gives so much depth to his space. Everything that felt alive in the photographs, we were able to then do, because we just jumped off that cliff and decided to keep this wall of mirrors, which they were able to shoot in. And I just thought they did a brilliant job. And it's one of my favorite sets in the show is Truman's apartment. And again, you just find those details. He had an amazing collection of glass paperweights and this giant viper that sat on his coffee table, and just embroidered pillows. And you just felt like he just bought everything he liked, and he didn't give a shit whether any of it worked, but he just threw it all in there, and somehow it does work. And it was fun to go in there every time.
Yeah, he was certainly a collector, it seems.
He
Uh,
was. He was.
and some of these spaces also have to exist, standard as they are, but then in a more surreal presentation, like when Babe and Truman are dying, the light is shifted and we get clued into this is not quite taking place in the real world. How do you prepare a space that has to kind of maybe both exist naturally and in that sort of surreal state?
Well, it's interesting because when we first started the show, I mean, when I signed on to the show, I only had the pilot. I mean, I had no idea what was coming. I've known Robbie Bates, the showrunner, for 30 years, and I thought, oh well, in this case, I'll get clues. But sometimes he didn't quite know what was coming either. I mean, it was just a process. So the surreal nature of where that apartment went, the Paley apartment, I had no idea. So we designed it, and quite literally, I had a door beyond her dressing room. Um, Put in for crew access, but also so that if anything came along later that we didn't know about, that was sort of an exit through which we could do it. And that's exactly where it ended up leaning into. And at that point, we were juggling episodes and sets and everything, and that death sequence or the dream sequence with the swan in the bathtub was written in. Ryan had very specific ideas of what he wanted in terms of this tub. And then we, again, just sort of elaborated off of that. And I just had this concept of expanding on the drapery that was such a quality of what her primary bedroom was, and going into her dressing room and say, well, let's just let the entire room be an expansion of this drapery. And then we weren't building a set. We just had to get yards and yards of silk and just create this voluminous ethereal world that was real but not real. And I wanted it to feel like you'd stepped into another dimension, but that it still was footed somewhat in the room that we had just left. So it's a process of practicality and time and budget, and then just it going into your brain and thinking, what do we do here? And it worked out really well. The Swan was a little difficult to deal with, but that wasn't my job at that point.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
You mentioned builds. When you have a series like this that, is taking place in the real world, in real locations, is there kind of a desire to try to find a real space to dress up and make fit the show? Or, what is the process of do we build something? Do we go find something?
Again, it's sort of nuts and bolts. I mean, I always start with just breaking down, well, the script that we have. In this case, again, we didn't know what was coming, but there were certain assumptions made. We knew that we were going to go back to the Paley apartment and La Côte Basque and Truman's. And so those were decided to be our anchor sets that we would construct on stage. Everything else was a location. And then it's just a gigantic location search. I mean, sometimes you find the perfect place and you can lean into set dressing that's there. And with mansions in Long Island, which is where we shot the whole show in New York, and we were in the Oyster Bay area with a lot of these locations, they can come with again a foundation of at least there's curtains hanging around the windows. But in this case, early enough, I actually there was a house that I had seen on Halston that I had scouted that wasn't right for that show, but I had remembered it, and so I was on my way out to see it because I thought, oh, this would be perfect for Anne Woodward's house, the Demi Moore character that we see in the flashback sequences. And I thought, oh, we can really lean into the furniture that this place has, and we can save a buck, and it's all good to go. And on the way out there, the locations department said, oh, by the way, that couple moved and the place is completely empty. So I had a moment where I thought, well, that didn't work out. But then I got there, and it turned out that the new owners were flipping the house into this kind of club, and they were going to gut it enough that I thought if we can get in here and use this as a revolving stage because there were so many different looks to this mansion, and it's exactly what we did. It was really our fourth stage, or it felt like a set because we just kept going back to it. It had everything. The pool in Jamaica was at that place. CC Guest Kitchen was out of that house. All of Ann Johnson's Demi's thing was in that house. But then Truman's the flashback to the little motel room with his mother when he was a boy was in that house. Slim's bedroom. I mean, we literally shot rooms over. And as we had new directors coming in, or as I got new scripts, I would be in that house and I'd read the new script and think, oh, maybe it's here. And I would just walk to another wing of the house and imagine what we could do. And I also knew how we'd already shot certain rooms. So if we dressed an entire room, but we didn't see a fireplace, all of a sudden I said, all right, well, we can feature it this time and just re-wallpaper or make new drapes. And it really was a sort of Chinese box of gifts of fantastic rooms that we were able to go in before they got gutted and just destroyed forever. With the bathroom literally the bathroom where Demi shoots her husband in the beginning in the first episode was the same bathroom where Babe gets into the tub and turns the shower on, and we just re-wallpapered it. And again, I knew which angles we had seen, and it had such great period details that we were able to just shoot it twice and keep going.
It's the Miracle House.
It was
It's
the
everything.
miracle house. It was truly the miracle house. And by the 18th time that I just suggested to everybody, I think we need to go back to the house. I mean, everybody got it, and then it was ease for production because everybody knew where the trucks were going to go, and it was like working with Cherish again. We just go back to the house.
Well, one of the biggest, I think, moments of the series is the very infamous black and white ball at the Plaza. And I'd love to know a little bit about how you created it. It's such an opulent, great set piece. What was recreating that like?
Well, it's interesting because it is one of the most opulent things in the show. But for us in the art department, it was arguably one of the easier sets to do. Once we secured the Plaza Hotel Ballroom as the location, I mean, it did 90% of the work for us because that's what it was. And it's the second time I'd done the black and white ball, and we weren't allowed to shoot in the Plaza because they were about to gut renovate it, however many years ago that was. So it wasn't available to us. But in this case, it was, and it hasn't changed that much. And when they did the ball, really, Truman said that the people were the decorations. I mean, it wasn't, aside from this fantastic balloon chandelier that hung from the ceiling, they were just banquet tables and with red tablecloths and some candelabras on the table. So we did that, and then Lou came in with her fantastic costumes and the rest of it. I mean, it was about location and the costumes. I mean, I will say that again, the way they keep us on our toes, they added a sequence, and the Plaza we couldn't afford to shoot there more, so we needed another location that could marry to the Plaza. So I had to find another. That was a trick. That one was difficult, but we ended up shooting at the Polish consulate, which was a fantastic Beaux-Arts building, and the fact that we were shooting the whole sequence in black and white really helped us because it just we were able to, again, the focus was on the costumes and we had a sense of architecture, but I thought that they worked pretty seamlessly. But the irony is that the black and white was not really that difficult for us. I would have been really bummed if we couldn't have gotten the Plaza Ballroom. I mean, we had backups, but it wouldn't have been as good. And then you're there shooting on the day, and you have a moment where I think this is actually the room where it happened, and again, they did such a great job replicating it that it's pretty cool when that happens.
I'm surprised the Miracle House wasn't the second location for it. It seems like it fit everything.
That's true.
Well, Mark, thank you so much. It's wonderful work on Feud, Capote versus the Swans. Everyone who's out there watching, make sure you stick with us the rest of this season. Mark, thank you so much. It was great talking to you.
Thanks, Sam.